surgery I've ever had. It's even worse than my age 7 tonsillectomy.
Oh, you can't remember that.
No, they said, do you have any problems with anesthesia?
Father, we thank you for your blessings and for your word, and ask you to guide and direct our Bible study this evening, that you'd be glorified. In Jesus' name, amen. We're in the 30th chapter of Genesis, starting in verse 25. And to refresh, what we talked about last time was Jacob and getting married and having ended up with 4 wives and 12 kids in a matter of 7 years. And now he has fulfilled his agreement with Laban. Now, so we'll start in verse 25 and pick up on that. It says, when Rachel gave birth to Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, send me on my way so I can go back to my homeland. So the 14 years was up. The 7 years that he waited to get Rachel, and he got Leah instead, and then another 7 years that he had to pay for having Rachel after a week with Leah. So in that 14 years, he had 12 kids, 11 boys and a daughter. And now the 14 years is up, and he goes to Laban and he says, I'm finished. I've done what the requirement was. Now I need to go back home. He says, give me, verse 26, give me my wives and children for whom I have served you, and I will be on my way. You know how much work I've done for you. Now, it wasn't like that Laban owned these 2 girls and his kids, but what he's saying is that they are related to him, and he wants to separate them from him and go back to home. So that was the way he approached it. But Laban said to him, if I have found favor in your eyes, please stay. I have learned by divination that the Lord has blessed me because of you. I don't know that he had to have divination to know that. He was prospering because Joseph was a good rancher. He was good to Jacob, Jacob was a good rancher, and he was able to really get things done. And so Laban was prospering. And so he doesn't want to lose him. This could just go on, and he could keep building up an empire. So he says, I'd like you to stay on. I'd like to pay your wages, whatever. And so he said to him, in verse 28, he added, name your wages and I will pay them. Jacob said to him, you know how I have worked for you and how your livestock have fared under my care. The little you had before I came has increased greatly, and the Lord has blessed you wherever I have been. But now, when may I do something for my own household? What shall I give you? He asked. Don't give me anything, Jacob replied, but if you will do this one thing for me, I will go on tending your flocks and watching over them. Let me go through your flocks today and remove from them every speckled or spotted sheep, every dark-colored lamb, and every spotted and speckled goat. They will be my wages. So now, of course, these are animals that are not the norm. And so there's some there. And he said, I just want the animals that aren't, full colored. So when they are speckled or ring straked, then that'll be mine. Now those didn't happen very often. You'd have one every now and then. They said that will be my wages. So then verse 33, and my honesty will testify for me in the future whenever you check on the wages you have paid me. Any goat in my possession that is not speckled or spotted, or any lamb that is not dark colored, will be considered stolen. So this was a good plan, that his livestock would be a certain way, and Laban's would be a certain way. And they would be very clear that if he had the kind that was full colored, that the white sheep, if he had a white sheep or a solid colored goat or whatever, then that would be considered stolen. So that was a good plan. Now, why would he want to do that? Why would he want to just take the scrubs, not knowing what he's going to get from it? Because they don't, like I say, they don't happen very often. You have some, but not very often. So I want to jump ahead to Genesis 31:10. We're going to look there, because this ties into his thinking. It says, in the breeding season of the flock, I lifted up my eyes and saw in a dream that the goats that mated with the flock were striped, spotted, and mottled. Then the angel of God said to me in a dream, Jacob, and I said, here am I. And he said, lift up your eyes and see all the goats that mate with the flocks are striped, spotted, and mottled. For I have seen all that Laban is doing to you. I am God. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed the pillar and made a vow to me. Now this, evidently, he had seen this vision before he made this agreement with Laban. And he's wanting to build his own business. And now, so he makes this proposal to Laban, and Laban is probably tickled with this. This is a good deal. This is going to be a good deal. And I'm going to get rich, and he's not going to get a whole lot. But Laban has not been good to him, really, and he's worked 14 years and really hadn't had much to show for it. So now we go to verse 34, and agreed, said Laban, let it be as you have said. Well, it's a good deal. Yeah, I'm for it. But now we see that Jacob has been a deceiver himself, and he's been deceived by Laban in the marriage and what he's been through. And Laban hasn't been that particularly good to him. But now he's made this deal. That sounds like we got something to start with now. But now listen what happens next, verse 35. That same day that's Laban, removed all the male goats that were streaked or spotted, and all the speckled or spotted female goats, all that had white on them, and all the dark-colored lambs, and he placed them in the care of his sons. So this is supposed to, we just got through reading where the deal was, I'm going to go through the flocks today, and I'm going to pick out these animals, and they'll be mine. And Laban said, okay. And he quickly got his sons to go run through there and grab all these ones that were supposed to belong to Jacob and take them away. So we see Laban taking these from the herd and has these sons take them, and they're going to be taking them a 3-day journey. But what's important to understand is that Jacob basically doesn't have anything. And one of the reasons that Laban wanted to get these separated was that he didn't want them interbreeding with the others, that they might produce some of these kind of animals. So we don't want him to have them. But he'd already said, "Well, those are going to be mine. They're going to be separated, and you can come and check." But he didn't want Jacob to have anything to start with. And yet that had been the deal. And we don't see Jacob doing much about that. He didn't really have much power. He couldn't really do a lot about it. This is what Laban had done to him, and he's starting out with nothing. But that's why one reason that I believe that he already had this confirmation from God that he's going to get these animals. He's going to get them. Now, we're seeing a transition with Jacob, and that he is really looking to God to take care of things. So he didn't feel like he had to go fight Laban over what he stole from him. That wasn't something he had any power over. He couldn't do anything to Laban. Laban had, the people, the community that worked for him, and he had the community behind him, and Jacob's just, somebody that came up and married into the family. And he, as far as he's concerned, he doesn't have it. There's people that could really do some damage to Jacob if he wanted to fight about it. So Jacob didn't do anything. So we are seeing a clearer picture of Laban's deception. So in verse 36, it says, "Then he put a 3-day journey between himself and Jacob, while Jacob continued to tend the rest of Laban's flocks." So Jacob was doing his job. But still, we see that Jacob is doing what's right, but Laban is stealing. Now I want to turn to Exodus 22:1. And of course, Exodus is after Genesis. So this is sometime quite a bit later. This is a while later. And this is when Moses got the law. And so this is a law. And it says, "If a man steals an ox or sheep and slaughters it or sells it, he must pay back 5 head of cattle for an ox or 4 sheep for the sheep." This is God's standard. This is who God is, that he believes in justice, and he is going to require justice from Laban. Laban is not going to get away with this. So he goes on here, and I just add that in there because we're going to see how this plays out, and it is God's doing. And this is, it's also, and I emphasize this, that Jacob has no power in the situation. So in verse 37, Jacob, however, took fresh cut branches from poplar, almond, and pine trees and made white stripes on them by peeling the bark and exposing the white inner wood of the branches. Then he placed the peeled branches in all the watering troughs so that they would be directly in front of the flocks when they came to drink. When the flocks were in heat and came to drink, they mated in front of the branches, and they bore young that were streaked or speckled or spotted. Jacob set apart the young of the flock by themselves, but made the rest face the streaked and dark-colored animals that belonged to Laban. Thus he made separate flocks for himself and did not put them with Laban's animals. Wherefore whenever the stronger females were in heat, Jacob would place the branches in front of the troughs, in front of the animals, so they would mate near the branches. But if the animals were weak, he would not place them there, so the weak animals went to Laban and the strong ones to Jacob. Sounds like a lot of hocus pocus. And that isn't something that really works. But Jacob, you could say, was operating with superstitious beliefs. The Bible is not teaching that animals are influenced by prenatal stimuli. And he's not talking about that. It merely records that Jacob held superstitions along with general Mesopotamian culture. This is something that he heard about or whatever, and they said, this is how this is supposed to work. Now, he knows that God had said he's going to bless him, but he's going to want to do his part, shall we say. So, these feelings about these peeled branches were similar to Rachel's mandrakes. And the mandrakes didn't produce fertility for Rachel. And that was one of the things we talked about last time. That's one of the things that that she could have desired from it. And well, neither do these branches produce fertility in the animals as well. So it says, the scripture says explicitly that Rachel's womb was opened by God. God opened Rachel's womb, and God explicitly has said that he's going to give Jacob the livestock like this. So verse 43. In this way, the man grew exceedingly prosperous and came to own large flocks and maidservants and men servants and camels and donkeys. So he's getting rich. He is developing his flock, and they're strong and healthy. And Laban now is getting the dregs. He's the ones that are really doing well. Jacob's getting just the opposite of the way it was in the beginning. And so he's happy. Jacob is happy, but that's good for him, but we're going to see that isn't so good for Laban. And so in Job 5:13, and it says here, he catches the wise in their own craftiness, and the schemes of the wily are brought to a quick end. And again, this is the way God works. Psalms 7:14 and 15. The wicked man makes a pit, digs it out, and falls into the hole that he has made. So when somebody's trying to be deceitful, that's not a good plan. And so being bad to Jacob is not a good thing for Laban. He is trying in his own strength and his own power that he has. He knows he has power over Jacob to do these things. So we go to chapter 31. It says, Jacob heard that Laban's sons were saying, Jacob has taken everything our father owned and has gained all his wealth from what belonged to our father. And Jacob noticed that Laban's attitude towards him was not what it had been. Then the Lord said to Jacob, go back to the land of your fathers and to your relatives, and I will be with you. So Jacob sent word to Rachel and Leah to come out to the field where his flocks were. Jacob is seeing the problems. Laban is upset things aren't working right. His idea of how he was going to have a very great herd of cattle, livestock, is not working out. And what's working out is Jacob's getting it all. And he's getting these weak animals, and they're, the right color and all, but there are not very many of them. It's just everything's going to Jacob. Now, what are the sons? They're saying that Jacob stole this from our father. He's doing exactly what the agreement was. That was the agreement. And so they can't really be honest about this and say that he's done this, but he said he's taken what wealth belonged to our father. So anyway, God has told him, go back to the land of your fathers, to your relatives, and I will be with you. I will be with you is what God told him. And he had already mentioned to us also that he was the God of Bethel, where he met him at Bethel. So, and we think about he's calling out Leah and Rachel, come out to the field. Now, they're in Mesopotamia, and the legal code of Mesopotamia is that you can't take your wives away from the family without their consent. They have to give you the consent to do that. If they didn't want to go, they could raise a big stink. And again, remember, Jacob has no authority in Mesopotamia. And so if the wives didn't want to go with him, then he's stuck. So he's calling them out. And of course, he's just calling Leah and Rachel out. The other two, they go, Zilpah goes with Leah and Bilhah goes with Rachel. So whatever they say goes. So he's talking to Leah and Rachel. And the idea is that they need to give the consent. So he's going to have to talk to them about the plan, what he's thinking, and see what their thinking is. So he's going to make the case. He's going to present his case to them. And so he starts out that verse 5 says, he said to them, I see that your father's attitude toward me is not what it was before, but the God of my fathers has been with me. So the first thing he tells them is that we have a problem with your father. He's not treating us right. He's not treating me right. And, you're with me and they're not treating you right. But we have what we have because God has been with me. He's giving God the credit. He's not saying, I've been so smart and I know how to peel the bark off these limbs, and he's not taking any credit for anything because he knows God did it. And he says, verse 6, you know that I have worked for your father with all my strength, yet your father has cheated me by changing my wages 10 times. However, God has not allowed him to harm me. So once again, we see the contrast between Jacob and Laban. And he says that Jacob has done what he's supposed to do, but God has blessed him. Once again, he gives God the credit. He says in verse 8, if he says the speckled ones will be your wages, then all the flocks gave birth to speckled young. And if he said the streaked ones will be your wages, then all the flocks bore speckled young. So whatever Laban said was going to be he changed his wages. Well, we're not going to do that anymore. And he focused. Before it was speckled, spotted, this or that, and different things. Now it's just going to be one. You're going to just get speckled one. That's all you get. And they all turned out speckled. You see? So he kept modifying the agreement, but every time he changed what the agreement was going to be, that's what was born. And this must have just really got him angry. He'd go out there and check the flock. What? You know? And if he changed the rules, they changed. The animals that were born were changed. Verse 9. So God, once again, he's giving God credit. For God has taken away your father's livestock and has given them to me. So we're seeing a real commitment now to God. He's recognizing God's leadership. He's seeing God's provision. And once again, he had nothing, and now he's wealthy. But not because he's so smart, but because of God. And that's what he's seeing. So, God's taking care of him. And he's enabling him to outwit the dishonest Laban. Verse 10. In breeding season, now he's still talking to his wives. In breeding season, I once had a dream in which I looked up and saw that the male goats mating with the flock were streaked, speckled, and spotted. Then the angel of God said to me in a dream, Jacob, and I answered, here am I. He said, look up and see that all the male goats mating with the flock are streaked, speckled, or spotted, for I have seen all that Laban has been doing to you. Now, he's letting them know, and I mentioned this earlier, that God had spoken to him about this. And he's relating to his wives what he had experienced with God. He had an experience with God, and God told him how things were going to be. So he was just going to do his job, and God was going to take care of him. And so he saw this, when he saw this vision that God gave him, it was like a prophecy. And it was Jacob had confidence in God that he was going to take care of him, but still we see that he still did the things with the taking the bark off the branches and all. He did that. So he's recognizing God did this, but he's kind of hanging in there that, he was part of it. And so he's developing his faith in God and recognizing that his ability alone couldn't do any of this. But he is still having a part of it. And he said in verse 13, I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar and where you made a vow to me. Now leave this land at once and go to your native land, which is the land of Canaan, which was Jacob's true inheritance. This what he has here, his cattle and all, it's not, that's okay, but his true inheritance is the land of promise. That's where he's going to go back. So he's presented his case to his wives. Verse 14, then Rachel and Leah replied, do we still have any share in the inheritance of our father's estate? Does he not regard us as foreigners? Not only has he sold us, but he has used up what was paid for us. So we have to look at, again, the culture. And so the payment for a wife was to be held like in escrow or into a trust, so that if the husband died or he abandoned the wife, she would have that as hers. And so they felt like that they were daughters of a reputable, a respected man in the community, and he had these daughters, and he was like a chieftain, and he had these daughters, and what did he do? He sold them just like they were slaves, just like he would sell a slave, and then he spent the money. So they loved Jacob, and all, and they're not resenting the idea that they are with Jacob, but they're saying that we were treated as if we were slaves, and yet he's a chieftain. He's a big guy in the community, and that's how he treated us. So, verse 16, surely all the wealth, this is the girl speaking, surely all the wealth that God took away from our father belongs to us and our children. So do whatever God has told you to do. So they recognize that this prosperity that Jacob has is their prosperity as well. So, whatever was going to be Jacob's was now theirs. And yet Laban, he had taken advantage of those 14 years of labor, and his livestock had developed, and he became wealthy because of Jacob's work. And he didn't put any money aside for his daughters. This was his. And think of it also how they must have felt when their father made the agreement with Jacob and then took away those very animals that he had promised to give to Jacob and left them really with nothing. And of course, Jacob is now describing to them his faith that he had in God from before that before that agreement was ever made. So this is a wonderful picture, because why would Jacob make such an agreement if he didn't really believe God? He had to believe God, or he wouldn't have done this thing. That's crazy to want to get the scrubs, which aren't going to be many, except that God had revealed it to him. So God had said, you need to go back. Verse 17, then Jacob put his children and his wives on camels, and they drove all the livestock ahead of him, along with all the goods he had accumulated in Padan Aram, to go to his father Isaac in the land of Canaan. When Laban had gone to shear his sheep, Rachel stole her father's household gods. Well, why she did this, Who knows why she would do this? And we'll talk why that there's, an issue of what she thought of these gods, but we're going to talk about that a little bit later. So she stole her father's household gods. Now, what was happening here? Where was Laban? He was shearing sheep. They would go out, and it would be like a big party in a way. They'd go out there, and they'd have a lot of shearers, and they had a lot of sheep to shear, and they would make maybe 3 or 4 days to shear all the sheep. And then they would party. This was a big celebration. This is when you got more money. You could sell the wool. So, we're finding out here that we're seeing a separation now between Laban and his family and Jacob and his family. And Jacob is on his way. They're leaving. They're going. And now Laban is doing his thing with what he's got. So it says in verse 20, moreover, Jacob deceived Laban the Aramean by not telling him he was running away. So we see that now Laban is called the Aramean. And that is identifying him. And yet Jacob is going back to his family in Canaan. So we're seeing an Aramean and a Canaanite, shall we say. Well, he's not a Canaanite, but he is from the land of Canaan. And so we're seeing a big division now that's starting to take place, where they were all one big group. Now there's a separation. So, verse 20. I want to read that again. Moreover, Jacob deceived Laban the Aramean by not telling him he was running away. Well, it's when we talk about deceive, he didn't give him a 2-week notice. Let's put it that way. When a person just walks off the job, well, your boss isn't expecting it, and you put him in a bind. You're supposed to give him a 2-week notice. Well, he was just leaving. God told him to leave, though. God told him, I want you to go. Go. So, in this sense, that he didn't give Laban any notice. So, in verse 21, he fled with all he had and crossed the Euphrates River. He headed for the hill country of Gilead. On the 3rd day, Laban was told that Jacob had fled. This was a surprise to Laban. He's been trying to probably figure out a scheme where he can get more value than he's been getting. If he has to take the herds or whatever he has to do, he's probably been scheming about how he's going to deal with this problem of Jacob and his wealth. Verse 23. Taking his relatives with him, he pursued Jacob for 7 days and caught up with him in the hill country of Gilead. So, Laban is upset. He is angry. And this wealth that was in his territory, and he had, like I say, had probably been figuring out a way to get it, it's gone. And he's coming after it. He's coming like army. He's going to come and he's going to take care of things. And one of the things we see here, some words used: fled, pursued, overtook, pitched tents. These are all related to the military. Laban was on the warpath. And he can't let this go. He's going with the men, and he's got the power with these guys. He can just wipe out, any resistance that Jacob is going to present, and he's going to bring that stuff back for himself. This is my stuff. Verse 24. Then God came to Laban, the Aramean, in a dream at night and said to him, "Be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad." Now, he had already seen God working for Jacob. He had already seen this. And you also have to remember, though he he has these gods and all, he also understands the God of Abraham, and because that's where Isaac got his wife, was from these people who understood the same thing about God, even though it wasn't a very perfect understanding, but it was a better understanding. So he had an understanding of this God and that he had power to do stuff. So when God came to him in a dream, he let him know, don't mess with Jacob. So, verse 25. Jacob had pitched his tent in the hill country of Gilead when Laban overtook him, and Laban and his relatives camped there too. Then Laban said to Jacob, what have you done? You have deceived me. You've carried off my daughters like captives in war. So now, Laban is coming to him, and he knows he can't go in there and do any damage. All he can do is talk. And he says, verse 27, why did you run off secretly and deceive me? Why didn't you tell me so I could send you away with joy and singing to the music of tambourines and harps? You didn't even let me kiss my grandchildren, my daughters, goodbye. You have done a foolish thing. So he is so sweet, and he was really treated badly, and he wanted to, if he had known that Jacob wanted to leave, this would have been a great celebration, and we could have had a good time and a family get together. Now, before that, Laban came into the camp and talked to Jacob. That night, in other words, over just, half mile away, there's Laban and his relatives. Not just his kids, but cousins and uncles and whatever. Second, third, fourth cousins, he probably had a herd of guys. And he didn't know what was going to happen. Jacob didn't know what was going to happen. So he had a long night, and he's probably nearly afraid. But God had promised that he was going to take care of him. So the meeting was kind of to what was going to take place was uncertain. And so when Laban came in and talked this way, Jacob was probably greatly relieved, because he just talking. He not throwing spears at him. He just throwing words at him. And again, what a phony what a phony the guy is. Talking all that sweetness and how he really, felt bad about not having this party. So he was playing the wounded and the wronged person. So verse 29, he says to him, Laban says to Jacob, I have the power to harm you. But last night the God of your father said to me, be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad. So he letting him know that God put a halt to it. And that may have been a wonderful thing for Jacob to hear, that God said he was going to take care of him. And now it's not just God telling Jacob, but he's telling Laban, who's this guy is going to give him some problems. So God is interceding for him, and he's seeing this. He says, verse 30, now you have gone off because you have longed to return to your father's house. But why did you steal my gods? Well, he was acting a fool and everything, but when he said, why did you steal my gods? Jacob was he wasn't expecting that. And so Jacob wasn't ready. He didn't have an answer for that, except this is crazy. That's crazy. Who would do that? So Jacob answered Laban, in verse 31, I was explaining why he left. I was afraid because I thought you would take your daughters away from me by force. But if you find, then he goes on and talks about these gods that were told. But if you find anyone who has your gods, he shall not live. In the presence of our relatives, see for yourself whether there is anything of yours here with me. And if so, take it. Now Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen the gods. So he said they need to die because he was sure, he was convinced that they didn't do anything. I don't know what happened to your God, but we didn't have anything to do with that. Why would we do that? And probably later on, when he finds out that Rachel did this, he's probably saying, why did you do that? Anyway, verse 33, so Laban went into Jacob's tent, and into Leah's tent, and into the tent of the two maidservants, but he found nothing. After he came out of Leah's tent, he entered Rachel's tent. Now Rachel had taken the household gods and put them inside her camel's saddle, and was sitting on them. Laban searched through everything in the tent, but found nothing. Rachel said to her father, don't be angry, my lord, that I cannot stand up in your presence. I'm having my period. So he searched but could not find the household gods. He could have said, well, I'll help you out, but I need to search your saddlebags or whatever. He could not imagine that she would do something like that. If she had stolen, that would be sacrilege. This was contaminating. This was impurity sitting on top of these gods. So from this, we see that he doesn't even worry about it. They can't be there. If she's having her period, she wouldn't be on top of her gods. Now, one of the things we understand about this, she could just be lying. How is he supposed to know? But probably she is lying. Because if she has any consideration, some people have said, well, she took the gods because Laban would use them to figure out where Jacob went. That doesn't make any sense, because she could have just thrown them away, destroyed them. Another thing is, it's really not hard to follow somebody who got all this cattle, and there's all kinds of, it's not like you're an Indian tracker and you're looking at where the footsteps of the horse, it's not like it would be hard to follow them. You didn't have to have a special trained tracker to do that. They could find out where they went. Another thing is that, well, she did it because she didn't want him to, she wanted to take away those gods from him so he wouldn't use those gods. Wasn't good for him to do that. Well, again, why didn't she just destroy them? So we don't know what her motive was, except that she had some notion in her training and her upbringing that that's a good thing. This is something that's good. We were raised with these little gods, and so maybe they're helpful. And so anyway, he didn't find anything. Laban didn't find anything. Verse 36. Jacob was angry with Laban and took Laban to task. What is my crime? He asked. What sin have I committed that you hunt me down? Now that you have searched through all my goods, what have you found that belongs to your household? Put it here in front of your relatives and mine, and let them judge between the two of us. So he says, you made a big production of this, and you brought all your relatives, and we got your relatives here. Well, just show us what you found in front of all these people that you drug with you here. He says, I've been with you for 20 years now. Your sheep and goats have not miscarried, nor have I eaten rams from your flocks. I did not bring you animals torn by beasts. I bore the loss myself, and you demanded payment from me for whatever was stolen by night, day or night. This was my situation. The heat consumed me in the daytime and the cold at night, and sleep fled from my eyes. It was like this for 20 years I was with your household. I worked for you 14 years for your 2 daughters and 6 years for your flocks, and you changed my wages 10 times. The God of my father, the God of Abraham, the fear of Isaac, have not been with me. Had they not been with me, you would surely have sent me away empty-handed. But God has seen my hardship and took my toil, the toil of my hands, and last night He rebuked you. So He just poured it out. He just let go of his feelings. Let him know how he felt about this whole situation, that he was wronged by Laban. And Laban answered Jacob, the women are my daughters, the children are my children, and the flocks are my flocks. All you see is mine. Yet what can I do today about these daughters of mine and about the children they have borne? Laban this is legal fiction, shall we say. he had no legal right to them, and to show his concern, he didn't have any concern for them, for the family. He had no concern for them, and it was just empty words from a hollow man. It really shows how little he was, how worthless he was. So he goes on, come now, let us make a covenant, you and I, and let it serve as witness between us. So now, this is kind of an about face, and Laban is kind of in a bad situation here because he's dealing with God in this. And also, his relatives, they're not necessarily in agreement with him. They don't necessarily agree with what he's doing, but they're there to support him. So, in reality, Jacob did not need a treaty because God's the one going to protect him. He didn't need any treaty with Laban. God was the one who was going to take care of him. However, it was a good thing to just keep them apart. And the treaty was going to be that they're going to be not going to mess with each other again. And so in the end, it was going to be worth it. They were going to be separate, and Jacob was recognized as a separate and independent people. His group was a big group, and now they're separate from Laban and his people. So, verse 45, so Jacob took a stone and set it up as a pillar. He said to his relatives, gather some stones. So they took stones and piled them in a heap, and they ate there by the heap. Laban called it Jegar Shahadath, and Jacob called it Gilead. Laban said, this heap is a witness between you and me today. That is why it is called Gilead. It was also Mizpah, because he said, may the Lord keep watch between you and me when we are away from each other. So now that God is going to be the one who's going to make sure that even though it's a symbol, it's a symbol that God is going to keep watch over them. Verse 50, Laban speaking again, if you mistreat my daughters, or if you take any wives beside my daughters, even though no one is with us, remember that God is a witness between you and me. So now Laban is saying that, God, you're going to have to answer to God if you treat your wives wrong or you do wrong by them. So
he's letting him know that you're going to, I'm not going to be around, and I can't take vengeance. I can't do anything about it. We're making a separation here. But God, you're not going to be separated from God. Laban also said to Jacob, here is this heap, and here is this pillar I have set up between you and me. This heap is a witness, and this pillar is a witness that I will not go past this heap to your side to harm you, and that you will not go past this heap and this pillar to my side to harm me. May God of Abraham, the God of Nahor, the God of their fathers, judge between us. So Jacob took an oath in the name of the fear of his father Isaac. He described God as the fear of Isaac. And of course we know that we're to fear God. And so he described him before as the fear of Isaac, his father, which was the God of his father. Now what did Laban do? He was making this oath, shall we say, the deities of Abraham and of Nahor and the gods of their father, which was literally the deity of his father, which was like these little images, So he had a lot of gods that he was talking about. He was committing himself to this deal by all these other gods, but not Jacob. So Jacob didn't go with Laban's formula. He just swore by the true God. Verse 54, he offered a sacrifice there in the hill country and invited his relatives to a meal. After they had eaten, they spent the night there. Early the next morning, Laban kissed his grandchildren, his daughters, and blessed them, and then he left and returned home. So Jacob's exodus from Mesopotamia was characterized by obeying God, that he was faithful to obey God. And his pillars, the placing of the stone pillars along the way, was a remembrance of the God of Bethel. And though he was far from perfect, we see his faith growing. We see the development that God is doing in the life of Jacob. And we see God is making this happen. God is developing Jacob. And you can look at Jacob and think he's a hopeless case. He's worthless. He's not worth it. But God saw that he was worth it. And he worked in this life. And so all the deception, all the intrigue, and the children he had developed into ultimately the 12 tribes of Israel. That was the beginning. This man was the beginning of the nation of Israel. Wow. It's just such a beautiful picture of God's mercy and God's power to work in our lives, and how wonderful that is. So it's just a preview. This is a preview of what God is going to do with his people. And we're always going to see throughout the story of the Bible that Israel had really changed much. There's a lot of problems with the people of Israel throughout their history. But God stays with them. He's not going to let them go. They're his people. And he doesn't forsake us. And he doesn't leave us. He doesn't forsake us. And he takes care of us even though how stupid we are. And we if we look at our own lives, we realize what we have come through, what our attitude has been about the things of the Lord through the years. And you just have to be thankful for what God has done, because it's just amazing. Because we say, if it had been left up to me, it would have been a total wreck. But God kept working with us, and we see that development as we saw in Jacob's life. So we're not through with Jacob, certainly, but we see the change that has taken place. Father, we thank you for your word. We thank you for all that you do for us day by day. And we thank you for training us and teaching us your greatness and your glory and your power to take care of us in every situation. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.